Exterior, ex-ground school, hangar, early morning. Great lights were conquering. A trainer sits outside the hangar with drones on its wings. Pudding arrives in yesterday, Faultygate's prison smell hidden under the cheap soap. Peggy is already there with a checklist and no sympathy on display. Peggy says late. Pudding says 3 minutes. Peggy says late is not a number, it is a condition. Let's hand him the checklist. Peggy says pre-flight started at left door. He stepped to the north. Peggy says that is not the left door. Pudding says I know where the left door is. Peggy says then that your body knew. He returned to the left door, opened the checklist. Pudding says, cabin documents? Pudding says, look, touch, and say. He looks at document punch. Pudding says, registrations, airworthiness, subjugated weight and balance. He reached toward it, then pulls back because she is watching. Peggy says, do not mind safety. He touched the punch. Pudding says restrictions, awarenesses, weight and balance. Peggy said again. She looked at her. Peggy says, you rushed because you were embarrassed. The airplane does not reward embarrassment. She start over. Pudding says, cabin documents. Look, touch, say. The railing is ugly at first, then that's ugly. Peggy says, fuel selector. Pudding says both. Peggy says verified. He bends, checks. Pudding says both. Peggy says 6 rails. He puts the seats, it checks, it clicks. Pudding says locked it. Peggy says yours too. He checked the other things, another check. A guest lifts the checklist corner. Pudding puts it down without thinking. Peggy says good. One word, he makes the mistake of needing it. Peggy says do not live on that. Do not live on that. He nods down the next items. Interior, ex-ground school, office, early morning. Fabian watched through the office window and Pudding's repeats and the same pre-flight item outside. Peggy stands beside the coffee machine, arms crossed it, not drinking. Fabian says you were hard on him. Peggy says she was soft on the plane. Fabian says she saw land for this. Peggy says then the land should get the standards for its money. Fabian lets that pass. Fabian says he has a present schedule, no aviation backgrounds, and English that flies back. Peggy said yes. Fabian said you want him up? Peggy said I want him accurate. Outside, Pudding start over after missing something. His shoulder shouldering. His hand continued. Fabian said careful you do not adapt a project. Peggy said careful you do not sell this one. That lands with history between them. Fabian says ISO lesson, not futures. Peggy says students hear that things, hear the other things. Fabian looks out at the Pudding again. Fabian says, do you hear it? Peggy do not answer fast. Peggy says, I hear the checklist. Outside, Pudding reads aloud to an airplane that does not care about his hand reasons. Interior, Dulan prison. Cafeterias, early morning. Breakfast is nearly over. The stings trials give out in a small wild breeze. Pudding sinks in the corners with a cold rice bowl. Flights are hanging out, and eyes that have not slept in the same place as his body. Vino drops into the chair across honking. Vino says, you look like the man losing a flight to paper. Pudding says, plane has reached. Vino flicks one hand out around. Vino says, L-speed, attitude, altimeter, very pointed people, please. Pudding said, do not help. Vino says, I'm excellent and not helping. He watches Pudding copy checklist items onto index cards. Vino says, why 3 lines? Pudding says, sings, hand, mouse. He showed the card. For fuel selector, touching, both ball, say both. 这是对吧？这样不对吧？错，改。Pudding says, if I'm really, I lied. If I touch and say it, maybe lace. That's. Vino says that is either wisdom or sleep. Deprivation. Pudding says today they share desk. Vino noticed the rain removed with 4 flying tags sticking out of Pudding's bag. Vino says, you still carrying that thing? Pudding says, it still means what to move. Vino says, very bossy ribbon. Pudding smiles almost enough. Across in the cafeteria, Huang enter and see the hangouts. Pudding clowning closed the folder before Huang reached the paper. Huang says, study on the government time. Pudding says, eating on my time. He takes a bit of the cold rice ball, chews, now curling. Huang says, logistic after account. Pudding says, I sell the change. Huang says, good, then your eyes are improving. Huang sleeps. Putting off the folder again, his hand shakes once. He puts it flat on the table until it stops. Interior at ground school, static Copic states. A retired trainer, Copic sits in a classroom corner, cut open for teaching. No engine, no sky, tears enough to humble him. Pudding sits in the left seat. Peggy stands outside the open front with the checklist. Peggy says, before start. Pudding places 1 index card on his tongue, then thinking better put it away. Pudding says, she adjusted and locked it. He pulls and clicks. Pudding says, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses. Touch same. Pudding says, fastened. Peggy said, do not prefer certainty. Build it. Would not perform certainty. Build it. He nods hand to the flue selector. Pudding says, flue selector both. Peggy says, verify. He looked down his finger, finds the selector. Pudding says, both. Pudding watched the student learn not to pretend. For 1 second, the copy is not memory for her. It is a run with the procedure. Peggy says again from the top. Pudding curled his eye to catch himself. Open lens. Pudding says eye outside, feet inside the lines. Peggy almost corrected him. Then heard what he meant. Peggy said good, top. He started again in his bag, the red back line under the index cards, not removed it yet, not forgotten. Exteriors, it's a ground school hangar night. The welcome party is half celebration, half inventory of the Hublots. Plus tables outside the hangar, fried fruits, warm beer, student in clean jacket talking about hours like morning. Pudding stands near the toolbox with a paper plant he has not touched it. Across the hangar, Peggy speaks with an older instructor, professional face, exhibit. A student, Kevin, 22 and expensive, noticed the Pudding's uniform back under the table. Kevin says, you can strike from work. Pudding says something like that. Kevin says, what work? Pudding says, correctional officer. Correctional officer. Kevin looks delighted in the worst way. Kevin says, so if we failed a check, so if you found a check right, you look up. Small laughed, not accurate, not crucial enough to object to, not kind enough to ignore. Pudding said, no, I only look up people with better jokes. The laugh gently directed. Kevin smiled thin. Kevin said, "Relax. We are suffering. We are all suffering here." Pudding says, "Some suffering has involved us." Peggy has heard enough to know where the crack is forming. Fabian lifts a bottle for quiet. Fabian says, "Two students who learn before the airplane teaches them. Everyone drinks." Pudding rises his cup late. Peggy watches the delays. It tells her more than the cost. Pudding slipped toward the open hangar door with his untouched plate. Peggy's follow after the giving runs enough time to forget he is doing it.